Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kano Reviews. Today we talk about Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne. Recently I of course took a deep dive into the history of Max Payne and played the first part for the first time. I of course could not leave it there since I was very impressed with the game and wanted to see what its sequel had to offer as well. Again, my history with this franchise was very weird, since Max Payne 3 was the first Max Payne that I ever played. So I almost played like the Star Wars original prequel order. But anyway, let's find out if this game improves on some aspects of the original. So with Max Payne 1 being a critical and financial success, the studio could make a lot bigger game from a production standpoint, and this shows. They have a lot more in-game cutscenes that are really well done and crafted, as do they now have professional actors for the faces in the comic book panel sequence that are still plentiful. I do agree that this dark and rough Max Payne face fits the voice and tone of the game a lot more, but having those quirky facial expressions of Sam Lake during these comic books was so charming in a kind of way that, weirdly, I kind of miss them. Lucky for me though, there are plenty of quirky Sam Lake faces to behold on the various TVs throughout the game, as they have some funny shows on there that still involve the people and the faces who made this game. Also a big pull with this game were the physics that it utilized. Max Payne 2 was released in 2003, which was a year before Half-Life 2, and so physics-based mechanics in games were still very new back then and interesting enough to make it worth checking out. While you walk through the world of Max Payne 2, a lot of items you can bump over and they react in a pretty realistic way. I was surprised of just how much I could flip over or interact with, since most of the games that utilized physics just had it on things like barrels and boxes. But even tiny objects in Max Payne 2 had physics enabled, and this actually had a function too. Sometimes when you would make a certain kill, the camera would zoom in on the body of the one you shot that goes into ragdoll mode. They often would fall into other objects that would all go flying everywhere, making it very spectacular and feel even more so like The Matrix or a John Woo movie. In terms of graphics overall, the game does look a lot better, though texture-wise, it was up there with the HD texture pack for Max Payne 1. Again, the big difference is how interactive the environment is with the physics. The character models, however, have received a significant update and look very good with even some facial expressions here and there in the cutscenes. So what's the story about with Max Payne 2? Well, yeah, so this is maybe the only part where it falls short compared to the first game, because even though the story in the first game was very simple, it was incredibly effective and you knew exactly what you were getting into. Max Payne had lost his family and now searched for clues on the street, only to finally come out to the head of a large corporation that had a hand in Payne's wife and daughter's death. In Max Payne 2, the story continues with a large focus on Mona Sachs, a character who also had a brief role in the first game. She is the femme fatale type character, and Max has an obsession with her and getting answers on who is after him this time. People start dying left and right of Max, and it turns out that someone is cleaning up after the mess of the first game, including members of a so-called inner circle that can turn the wheels of law enforcement the way they want to. In the end, it turns out that someone you thought was on your side actually wants to get rid of you. And all in all, the story just isn't as impactful as the first game. It's quite convoluted and unnecessarily drawn out for something that in the end feels like a small story. It just does not hold the same weight as the first story, and therefore it did not grip me as much. But it's weird and might almost sound hypocritical, because the story presentation in this game is way better than the first, with cutscenes now being played out really well and cinematically. It's very fun and engaging to watch these cutscenes, and they do get you in the mood for another detective film noir adventure. It's just that the context isn't as appealing this time around. Mona Sachs' role in this is also that she's involved with the party that wants to get rid of Max, but she develops feelings for him, making it difficult for her to do this. It's all a bit melodramatic, but not to the point where it annoyed me. There's still plenty of humor to be found here, and the overall tone and style is still incredible. There are even some sections where you play as Mona. This is fun, though I wish they had given her some different powers or something, because she plays the exact same as Max does. So the story is a weird double-edged sword, with on one end taking a step forward and on the other taking a step back. It's still very engaging, and I could not wait to shoot up all those bad guys again in those grimy, dark apartment buildings of New York. You will be doing plenty of that. The shooting mechanics work mostly the same as the first game. You can activate bullet time and use shift to jump out of the way and dodge to the sides, front or back, while still aiming at the enemies. I thought that the controls and game overall felt a lot smoother, and so it was way easier to get those good headshots off, and overall the gameplay is a lot more pleasant because of it. My critique of the first Max Payne game was that some sections felt really cheap and enemies could sometimes kill you in 2 shots, but they made it a bit more reasonable here. It can still be a challenge, especially in the parts where you need to protect someone during Overwatch, but I barely died in this game, whereas with the first Max Payne, I died numerous times. The gunplay really feels satisfying in Max Payne 2, even more so than Max Payne 1 in my opinion. Bodies really show impact on where you shoot them, and the shooting never gets old. The blood effects are once again really visceral and vibrant, making it so much more over the top and awesome feeling. They do mess a bit with how the bodies react to gunfire though, and sometimes they completely defy the laws of physics and fly many yards through the air like a ragdoll made of rubber. It's a bit cartoony, but for me even emphasized more that Matrix feeling with bodies being blasted everywhere. I really like that actually. The environments are this time around also way more vibrant and detailed, despite still having that awesome film noir style of the slums of New York. Stylistically, there are so few games that go for this, but Max Payne pulls it off flawlessly. I will say that with the environments, it's a shame that they recycle some levels multiple times, a few even up to 3 times. Now the circumstances that you go there will be very different. For example, the first time it will be without enemies, the second time with enemies, and the third time when it's all on fire. But still, it felt like the team ran out of budget on the actual game itself as it spent so much on production and presentation. You will also revisit some locations from the first game, including Club Ragnarok, the gothic dance club that now has changed into a restaurant, and it was fun to revisit these areas. Besides the action, which again this time is just top-notch and always fun, there are some sections where you don't shoot anyone and just have exposition. I realized I did not really talk about the dream sequences in the first Max Payne during that review, and it was a bit of a big deal back then, but nowadays it just doesn't impress me at all, so I never thought anything about it. There are some dream sequences in Max Payne 2 as well, but they are not the exposition parts that I'm talking about. There is, for example, a sequence where Mona Sachs is arrested, and you are at the office and can explore the place freely. There isn't that much to see, but you can go to multiple floors and see interactions and conversations of multiple characters throughout the building. It again makes the overall world more believable and alive, and is something Remedy also pulled off really well with Alan Wake. In all honesty, I don't have a lot of critique for this game. Again, with the story, it improves in some parts while lacking in others, balancing things out. The action feels better and more impactful than in Part 1, and the set pieces and environments are awesome, though get maybe reused a couple of times too many. Maybe the biggest critique can be the game's length, as it's shorter than the first game and notorious for being able to complete in well under 4 hours. It took me personally probably between 4 and 5 hours on my first playthrough, but by now I bought the game for $1.50, so that is well worth the price. But I can definitely see how back in the day, it was too short for a $50 game. All in all, I can do nothing but recommend Max Payne 2, as it continues this awesome tone and setting put on in Part 1. The first Max Payne has a clearer story that is more effective, and the quirky limits that game has are actually charms that work in its favor. But other than that, Max Payne 2 improves on a lot. In the end, Max Payne 2 gets an 8.4. I find it slightly better than Part 1, but Part 1 also has its awesome points and both are definitely worth checking out. I can also spoil already that I'm a big fan of Max Payne 3, and I think it will be fun to guess where I would rank that one in the list, especially since that was the very first Max Payne title I ever played. But what's more, is that since I already know I like that game, I wonder if Max Payne is a series that should be known amongst gamers as one of the best trilogies in gaming ever. We will see.